A husband suddenly disappears.
Did he sound like somebody had a gun to his head?
A faithful wife turns detective.
I became obsessed with figuring out where he was.
Determined to find the man she loves.
He's a wanted criminal.
I honestly didn't know that my mother was going to die.
I think he's evil. I don't think he has a soul.
It's a twisted tale of greed and power.
What he did was unforgivable, despicable, and criminal.
I wanted this guy. I wanted him in front of the jury.
And one woman will do anything to uncover the truth.
There's a psychopath out there, and I don't know who he is anymore.
Mykonos, Greece. Pristine white buildings and golden beaches. It's an island playground for a jet-set crowd. It's here that Michelle Kramer's husband, 41-year-old Dr. Mark Weinberger, planned a celebration for her 30th birthday. The couple is staying on their private yacht and looking forward to the upcoming festivities until the unthinkable happens.
I woke up in the morning with a sense of panic, which I think was just my intuition, women's intuition. And I felt the bed next to me and he wasn't there. My logic brain was like, oh, he went running. He runs in the morning. So I put on my gym shoes and started running around the island seeing if I could find him.
It's a small island, and there are only a few places that Mark can be.
And I went to the breakfast place and I went to the coffee shop and I couldn't find him.
Michelle frantically searches their favorite cafes and stores. But an hour into her hunt, her intuition sends her reeling.
My gut was in knots, and I just had this horrible feeling that something awful was about to happen.
I think initially Michelle felt, was it foul play? She felt, this is not Mark, something's happened. Here's a guy who has an 81-foot yacht. Here's a guy who is living in the lap of luxury. Here's a guy who's making millions of dollars as a doctor. You know, maybe there's people who are after him professionally, who are jealous of him.
I had no grasp on reality of what was actually happening. And I come back on the boat and I ask the captain, Lupo, where's Mark? And he's like, just relax. It's your birthday. You're gonna have a huge party. He's gonna come back. By sundown, he'll be back.
And then, Michelle remembers Mark's last words to her the night before.
I remember him looking up at me and was like, you really do love me, don't you? As if he just was realizing that now. And he was like, yeah, silly, of course I love you. You know, just get some sleep, you've obviously been stressed. And he turned to me and he said that you're gonna have such a huge surprise for your birthday that it's only something that celebrities have and you'll remember it for the rest of your life.
In hindsight, his words are eerily prophetic. But at the time, she didn't think twice.
Wake up, princess.
Romantic surprises are nothing new to Michelle.
Ooh, nice diamond. Let's see your necklace.
Mark has been showering her with expensive gifts.
Wow, look at it.
Ever since their first date in Chicago in early 2000.
I was 25 years old, and I just thought he was very charismatic and debonair, and he swept me off my feet. I think that we didn't leave each other for maybe the first week, and then he invited me to Miami, where he had his boat.
This is awesome.
Michelle told me when she met Mark, it was instant love. I think it was instant love on both ends. They hit it off almost immediately. I think there was actually a certain shyness to him that she found very, very appealing. He swept her off her feet, there's no question. She was from the south side of Chicago. She came from a working class family. She had worked her way up. Life had not been easy for her.
But after meeting Mark, a wealthy and gifted surgeon, Michelle's life becomes something out of a fairy tale.
I love you, baby.
I love you, baby.
They got married in a little town in Italy with an incredible inn where Winston Churchill had stayed. Everything he did was totally top shelf.
He treated me, you know, with such kindness, and he was so generous, and he was kind to my family.
Say hi, Dad.
Hi, Michelle. How you doing?
Good.
My parents loved him. My father was very strict, didn't like a lot of the guys that I dated, but my dad really loved Mark. The fact that he was a doctor and he thought that he would take care of his little girl.
That's the man Michelle thought she married. But now, 3 years later, abandoned in Greece, Michelle has no idea where Mark is. And soon, she'll be wondering who he is as well. It's been 12 hours since Mark disappeared.
I couldn't concentrate on anything except this horrible feeling that something was awful and was wrong. So I asked the captain, like, you have to tell me where Mark is. And that's when he sat me down, and it was like one of those surreal moments. So there was like that 1 second before your life changes, and as soon as he opened his mouth, he was just like, Mark is gone and he's never coming back. I was in shock.
Lupo, the captain of their yacht, seems to know more. Michelle presses him for details.
I asked Lupo if he had any other contact information for Mark. He said yes, he has a cell phone, a Greek cell phone. I started calling the Greek cell phone number, and he answered. He was like, hello? And I was like, Mark? It's Michelle. And there was silence, and then he just hung up. I couldn't even wrap my mind around what happened.
Desperate for an explanation, Michelle calls Mark's head nurse back home. Suzette Dennington works side by side with Mark at the sinus clinic he owns in Merrillville, Indiana, just 40 miles south of Chicago.
I got a call from Michelle, and she said, did you talk to Mark? I said, yeah, I talked to him a little while ago. And she said, well, how did he sound? Did he sound like somebody had a gun to his head? I said, well, I don't know what that would sound like, but no, he sounded fine.
And I was just like, this is not acceptable. Like, I do not accept this. This is ridiculous.
Searching for reasons that Mark would disappear, Michelle begins to recall their last months together.
It wasn't like the marriage was dissolving or we had been fighting. I mean, there was tension. I believe that was a look of disdain by Mark.
It turns out Mark has a lot on his mind. His lucrative medical practice is under scrutiny.
Michelle and Mark have a rocky summer. It's rocky because he's getting slammed at work with a lot of subpoenas.
Probably a year before he disappeared, he started getting really stressed out about a potential malpractice lawsuit. I just heard his side, so I assumed that these were exploitative, litigious people that wanted to take the opportunity because he was successful.
When Michelle returns to Chicago, 6 days after Mark has vanished, she begins to look for any clues that Mark may have left behind.
I became obsessed with figuring out why he did this and where he was. So I had gotten all of his cell phone records. There were a lot of calls to New York, and I was like, what, did he have a girlfriend in New York? I don't understand. So I got these men on the phone, and they were diamond brokers. And they told me that he kept flying to New York on his lunch break on his jet, or flying them into Indiana, just buying diamonds. And I was like, diamonds?
Mark was secretly converting cash into diamonds, the international currency of criminals.
Michelle was not going to let this go. Now, why would you do this to me? Why would you do this? Look, you can leave me, you can hate me, but give me some explanation. This is the worst punishment imaginable.
I went to his office and I found papers that he shredded. And I stayed up for 5 days straight, not eating, not sleeping, just pasting together pieces of paper that were shredded. And I finally pieced them all together into a puzzle, and there was a piece of paper that had his handwriting and it had the name of a hotel in Paris. And I was wearing sweatpants, and I took my passport in my sweatpants, and I went to the airport.
This is burning inside her. Husband and wife have fights, but they don't disappear into thin air in Europe on a vacation.
Sometimes I wish nobody knew who I was. Sometimes I wish nobody knew my name. They do?
Wealthy Chicago surgeon Dr. Mark Weinberger has disappeared, with no explanation. 10 days later, Mark's wife, Michelle Kramer, hopes to track down the man she loves with nothing more than the address of a hotel in Paris.
I had his picture and just went there with the clothes on my back.
She says that there must be some explanation. I mean, we're married. I'm still in love with you. We were so in love. It's complete serendipity. It's a 1 in a million. She goes to Paris.
And I went to the hotel that he wrote down. The receptionist there, she said, yes, we saw him. He just left yesterday. He came, he checked in by himself. He sat at the bar every night and had dinner, and I missed him by a day.
I'm sorry, madame, you missed him by a day. And I think that's when it sinks in for the first time. He's gone on purpose. He planned this, and he's not coming back.
Nobody abducted him. Nobody put a gun to his head. He literally threw me away like a piece of trash. I stayed up the whole night just bawling my eyes out and crying. That was actually my 30th birthday. I was alone in Paris crying.
And Michelle isn't the only one that Mark has abandoned. Back in the United States, head nurse Suzette Dennington struggles to explain Mark's sudden disappearance to his patients.
Gosh, I was angry. Because it was just like the rug being pulled out from under you. I called him every hour for 24 hours. I mean, even during the night, called and left him a message. And my last message to him was, I just want to know you're okay.
2 weeks after Suzette learns Mark has mysteriously ditched Michelle in Greece, 2 strangers show up at the Weinberger sinus clinic.
Everybody had continued working, so showed up at work. There were some financial people there. I think they were from the bank. And we were all notified that if he didn't show up by 9 a.m., we had till noon to clear our belongings out, that the business would be closed.
The bank that holds the clinic's funds believes that Mark has been siphoning money out of the business accounts.
They started to say, there's millions of dollars missing. He hasn't paid anyone. He took tons of money out of all the accounts.
Taking no more chances, the bank's representatives shut the clinic's doors immediately. Dr. Mark Weinberger's 40 employees are all out of jobs, and he's still nowhere to be found.
I felt betrayed. I thought, surely he would have said something to me, or he would have, done something that this wouldn't have been such a shock or so devastating. Because I live in this area. I was running into former patients and potential patients. It was almost like going into hiding because I didn't want to have to answer questions from people going, where'd he go? What's going on? What happened?
It is a spectacular fall for a booming business that Mark built from the ground up just 2 years earlier. An hour commute from Chicago, Merrillville might seem like an unlikely place for a showy doctor like Weinberger to settle. But the poor air quality in the region contributes to a high number of patients with sinus problems. When the Weinberger Clinic opens in 2002, local steelworkers flock to see the new doctor in town.
When I did the story, I saw the outside. There's this huge schnoz. I mean, there's this nose that's like the pietà of ear, nose, and throat clinics. And it was marble, and he wasted no expense.
Well, he was a marketing genius. He had read books. He had decided on how best to get people in the door.
Mark refers to himself as the nose doctor. So you're driving down the interstate and you see this huge billboard of Mark and saying, sinus problems, call 1-800-sinuses. Then you go into this clinic and you see his degrees from Penn, from UCLA. You see this Taj Mahal place. And you say to yourself, this guy is the best thing that's ever happened to Merrillville.
And it works. Weinberger's clinic soon becomes one of the busiest ear, nose, and throat clinics in the Midwest. A $14 million a year enterprise. And his earnings are fueling a lavish lifestyle.
So he had this huge, 5-story home with an elevator that was in the middle of the Gold Coast. And he started to hire 3 different drivers. And he had to have a massage therapist.
Like your husband?
His wealth was accelerating. Eventually, our yacht would be parked next to, Bill Gates' yacht. That's when things started getting just huge.
Michelle enjoys the wealth that Mark's career affords, but she steers clear of his business dealings.
I'd only been to the clinic twice. He kept me at a distance, and it was in Indiana, so it's not like I would drop in and see what was happening there. I knew that he was super busy, and I thought that that was a good thing.
But now the clinic is closed, and Michelle realizes that the allegations of malpractice are more serious than Mark let on. Attorney Ken Allen is the first to file a lawsuit against Mark in October of 2002.
He's a son of a bitch. How's that sound? He took advantage of his patients. He believed that the people were so unsophisticated here that the patient would follow his advice. Take his word that they needed surgery and go forward with it without a second opinion. When in fact there was no medical need for his surgeries. It was just a need to feed his greed.
The clinic's bread and butter are patients like Bill Boyer, who suffers from sinus allergies.
Then I met Dr. Weinberger, and right away he gave me, I guess, what would have been an MRI, a X-ray of your sinuses. Doctor come back a little while later, and on his computer screen, he showed me these nasty-looking things that he called polyps that were in my nose. I looked at the picture, and I thought, this is in my nose? I mean, the pictures were really grotesque. They were gross. And he told me I needed surgery on my nose.
But after the surgery, Boyer continues to have sinus problems. Later, Dr. James Stankowitz discovers something highly unusual.
And I asked to see the CT scan preoperatively, and the CT scans were sent to me, and they were normal.
It was determined I never did have polyps. It was not my nose.
Total dishonesty and fraud, and you're putting people on the operating room table for no reason.
And I was like, what's this guy doing? What did this guy do? And then it was determined that he drilled holes in my skull from the inside of my nostrils.
It is a surgical procedure that makes Boyer's sinus problems even worse. And more than a year before Mark disappears, the suspicion is that this kind of unnecessary surgery, or even billing for surgeries that never happened, is common practice at the Weinberger Clinic.
And he did what we call sham surgery, which is basically no surgery. That's why he was able to do 10 surgeries a day, each being about 20 minutes long, and billing each one of those surgeries for probably $10,000.
He was the only doctor seeing about 100 patients a day, doing about 100 or 150 surgeries a month. It was a complete surgery mill.
According to Ken Allen, Mark chose to practice in northern Indiana for one reason only: to prey on the hard-working people plagued by bad air who work in the factories of nearby Gary.
But you don't go to Maryville, because you want to do good work. So you go to Maryville because there was tremendous business to be done. These are blue-collar people who work for unions in the steel mills. And you know what that means? They got insurance. And you know what that means when you got insurance as a doctor? You're going to get paid.
I fell in love with Mark because of the fact that he was such a great doctor. And I never in a million years would have imagined that that's even possible. Like, who does that?
By August of 2004, just a month before Mark vanishes, Dr. Stankowitz decides to act.
I made a phone call to the Indiana medical licensure saying, you need to look at this guy up in northwest Indiana. Something's not right there.
To everyone at the clinic, Mark appears to be under enormous stress.
This was his reputation that was being attacked. He withdrew and started closing his door.
He's clearly unraveling. And why is he unraveling? He's unraveling because suits have been filed at that point. He was under an enormous amount of pressure.
I believe his original plan was just to make money and perhaps drill holes in people's sinuses or do unnecessary surgeries or just put them to sleep and charge their insurance company for procedures he didn't perform. But he thought he was not going to kill anyone.
And then Phyllis Barnes dies.
Mark Weinberger gave Phyllis Barnes the death sentence.
Notice all the alcohol bottles? You know who those belong to, don't you? This man right here. Dr. Weinberger of the Weinberger Clinic. Now he'd like to go out for more alcohol and a cigar.
By all accounts, Dr. Mark Weinberger, who grew up in a wealthy suburb of New York City, was destined for success.
He did very well in school, was a smart kid. He went to Penn, did very well at Penn, did great at UCLA. He has the goods. He is a very, very good doctor.
Ask me how much my hands are worth.
How much are your hands worth?
It was evident from the very first day what a perfectionist he was. Doing everything right was of key importance to him.
But in the summer of 2004, rumors of malpractice circulate around Weinberger's office and the media.
You could open up the local newspaper and there's an ad for a law firm wanting people who had had sinus surgery in Northwest Indiana in the last 2 years to call them because they may have had unnecessary surgery. That's when the lawsuits started to pile up.
But the Phyllis Barnes lawsuit bothers Mark the most.
My sister, she loved life. She was a social worker. She found jobs for unemployed steel workers, which is really a big problem in this area, and she lived to help people.
Phyllis had sinus problems, like many of us do in this area. She had been a smoker for most of her life, had a sore throat and a cough for many weeks, and having seen Dr. Weinberger's billboards everywhere, she felt he was qualified and competent to treat her sinus condition.
Phyllis's first appointment with Mark Weinberger is in the fall of 2001.
He didn't even examine her, ordered a CT in his office at a cost of a few $1,000s. Read the CT, he saw polyps, and he did what he did with every other patient, scheduled surgery.
From the time they took her out of the waiting room, it was probably 20 minutes before they said she was finished. I asked if the doctor had seen her, and they said he does not see patients after surgery. And that is when I smelled a rat.
1 month later, when Phyllis's condition fails to improve, she returns to Weinberger, who tells her to wait a bit more. Phyllis's daughter, Shawn, was 16 years old at the time.
She was telling me about how many other doctors had recommended this guy and his credentials, and she just sort of made it sound like he was legit.
2 months later, Phyllis still feels miserable. And then one night, Shawn comes home to find her mother in distress.
She could not breathe. And I'm calling 911 and trying to describe what's going on, and my mother's just heaving. And I can just see how scared she was. She couldn't breathe, and by the time they got her to the hospital, they had to take her directly into surgery, and then she was in a coma for weeks.
The diagnosis is clear. Phyllis has stage 4 throat cancer.
When I learned that just 3 months after she had seen an ear, nose, and throat specialist, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer of the larynx, I knew something was wrong, because had Weinberger bothered to do what he's supposed to do and examine her throat, he would have seen the tumor.
Why the hell did he think it was in her sinuses? Why the hell does another ENT, with a cursory exam, looking at her, looking into her throat, says, I know what's wrong with you, it's throat cancer? He should have diagnosed that. But the speculation is he doesn't care.
To save her life, surgeons remove Phyllis's malignant voice box.
Because of what Weinberger did or didn't do, they took her larynx, they took her voice, and the son of a bitch took her dignity.
In a video deposition from 2003, Phyllis shares her hopes for the future.
What's your biggest concern in life?
That's my daughter. I am my only daughter. My daughter's only surviving parent. I just want to make sure that she goes to school. I just want to be able to live and see those things happen.
Phyllis Barnes never gets to see her daughter Shawn go to college. She dies on September 16th, 2004, less than 3 years after her first appointment with Dr. Mark Weinberger.
I honestly didn't know up until that point that my mother was going to die, and I was hit by a freight train. It was just insane.
And just a week after Phyllis dies, Weinberger vanishes.
You think You got no idea.
I have a very strong sense of justice. It's disgusting what Mark did. And, you know, had I known back then, I would have been the first one to like up and leave. I mean, you don't do that. You don't abuse power and hurt vulnerable people. You just don't.
Then, in November 2004, 2 months after Mark disappears, Michelle makes a shocking discovery.
He was still using his credit cards. The gall of somebody to like run away like that and still use their own credit cards. And I had all the credit card bills, so I knew everywhere that he went, all the stores that he went to, all the casinos that he went to. And I saw the day that he left Paris, he took a train down to Cannes.
Armed with these new clues, Michelle sets off to France for the second time to track down her fugitive husband.
She's angry now. She's angry. She's not confused. Maybe there's love in there somewhere, maybe, but she's angry. Where the hell are you? Why have you done this to me? He has completely screwed her.
There are 8 million stories that investigate. This is one.
Accused of malpractice, this left hundreds of patients maimed and an innocent mother dead. Dr. Mark Weinberger has escaped to the French Riviera with a pile of money he's stolen from his medical practice.
The speculation is he has diamonds worth about $1 million. Diamonds are very liquid. They're easy to get rid of.
In November of 2004, 2 months after Mark vanishes, his wife, Michelle Kramer, flies to Cannes armed with nothing more than credit card receipts and a desire for justice.
I had handcuffs. I figured if I see him there, I am going to handcuff him, and then I'm going to call the FBI in America, and then they can come and arrest him. And I called my mom. It was like, oh my God, like he is going to like lop off your arm with a knife. You don't know who he is anymore. Like you can't do that. And I was just like, watch me. I had his picture and I went from bar to bar, cafe to cafe.
She's intrepid. She goes to casinos, you know, she's going up to people in a different language with a picture saying, have you seen my husband?
But once again, Mark is one step ahead of Michelle.
There was a sense of sadness and some fear, but mostly just anger. There's a psychopath out there now who betrayed me and hurt other people, and I don't know who he is and I don't know where he's at.
When Michelle returns to Chicago, she faces even more bad news. Mark has drained the cash from his business accounts, and now Michelle discovers their personal accounts are empty too.
I didn't have a checkbook. I didn't have a checking account. Everything was leveraged against itself. He didn't really own anything. So there was nothing to sell, there was no assets, there was nothing.
All these unpaid bills are coming. She's broke, can't pay gas, can't pay electric. She takes a shower one day, the water goes cold. Now there's the sense of, Mark, not only did you leave me, not only did you disappear, you have ruined my life.
I broke down, and there would be nights where I was just like laying on the kitchen floor, like, just curled up and just weeping. The house was so eerie. I couldn't pay for the house, so it was going to be seized very soon. Everything was being seized.
In 2005, Michelle is forced to file for bankruptcy. A year later, she is granted a divorce from Mark in absentia. Her life has been ruined by Mark Weinberger, and she does her best to forget what's happened.
I realized I don't want to be known for this mistake that I made in my life. I would much rather just move forward and focus on my career and my future and put it behind me. So at that point, I gave up.
There are no more trips to Europe with handcuffs, but over the next few years, Michelle continues to tell her story to the media.
And it was like peeling like the scars away from my heart, telling the whole story.
And she isn't the only one who hopes that Mark will be caught.
I wanted this guy in court. I wanted him in front of a jury. I thought that would be some measure of justice for him to explain why he did what he did. We had our investigators running down leads that he was in China or in Puerto Rico, Israel.
And then, in December of 2006, more than 2 years after he disappeared, the state of Indiana finally gathers enough evidence to file criminal charges against Mark Weinberger.
He's now been indicted. So he's facing 22 counts of insurance fraud. He's been indicted, he's in the Interpol database, he's a wanted criminal.
But Mark's trail has gone completely cold. In a remote corner of the Italian Alps, a dark-haired American who goes by the name of Mark Stern meets a local woman who runs a small grocery store.
He was interesting and charming. He told me, I come from New York. First thing, New York, okay, you know Beastie Boys, so that was our first connection. He told me he made enough money to live free and outdoor for life, entire life. Wow.
I've met Monica, she's great. She wonders, what are you doing here? And Mark says, I'm retired. I was a very rich stockbroker. I made a lot of money. I'm divorced.
He loved a lot of outdoor activities, like ski, to climb, and ride bicycles. So my passion and his passion was absolutely connected.
Mark wants to be at one with nature. That's become his spiritual guide, and Monica helps fulfill that purpose.
Are you happy? I'm happy, baby.
We was every day together. I realized Mark was a good guy for me. I was falling in love with him.
It's getting heavier, it's getting romantic. Mark meets the parents, and then they have sexual relations in which Mark is in for somewhat of a surprise. And the surprise that Mark is in for is that Monica is a transgender.
He understood totally. He loved me for who I am. He told me, it's not important. You are a woman. That for me was incredible.
They just get closer and closer and closer, and I think he falls in love with her.
But in November of 2009, after spending nearly a year together, Mark decides to leave the comforts of life with Monica and test his wilderness skills.
He told me, Monica, I want to stay outdoor. He bought a tent, sleeping bag, jacket, come si dice guanti? Gloves.
Not only does he want to be a survivalist, he basically has decided he's going to spend a winter living in a tent almost at the foot of Mont Blanc. Monica thinks he's crazy. Monica knows the mountain and that area much better than he does and says it's really dangerous. And if there's a snowstorm, she won't be able to find him. He won't be able to find her.
For me, it sounded like a crazy thing, but was a challenge for him. I told him, that's what you want, I'll help you.
Good morning. These are my Incredible Hulk gloves and my Incredible Hulk boots. I'm trying to make some water so I can make coffee for my girlfriend.
When he lived in the tent, I would visit him every day. I would bring him food, his favorite granola, clean clothes. He seemed happy in his tent, in his refuge.
3 weeks later, Monica gets a frantic call from a friend.
He told me, Monica, you have a big problem. I found a strange thing about Mark. He's not what he claimed to be. What do you mean? He's a wanted criminal. Criminal? Show me proof. I need to see. He gave me a copy of the American Most Wanted website.
Monica watches America's Most Wanted. She is shocked. Absolutely shocked, because the whole story is there. He's been indicted, he's a wanted criminal, there are hundreds of malpractice suits against him.
I could not believe it. Wanted in the United States was like a knife in my heart.
Here's a guy living in a tent in the middle of nowhere at the foot of a glacier in northern Italy. You can't make this stuff up.
It's been 4 long years, since Dr. Mark Weinberger abandoned his sinus clinic in the face of hundreds of lawsuits. Now his Italian girlfriend, Monica Spicogna, has discovered Mark's dark secret.
My entire world collapsed. What he did was crazy, unbelievable. Was why? You have money, you are a rich person. Why? I'm an honest person. I have to call police.
Monica has a sense of justice, and she said, I'm obligated. I'm obligated to report to the police what I know. And she speaks to the captain, and they say, let's find this guy. There's about 10 feet of snow. It's about 4 or 5 below. The conditions are horrendous. It's cold, it's windy, there's ice, and suddenly, there he is. There's Mark Weinberger. Then they say, can we see ID? He has no ID. They asked him to get out of the tent. He's very, very cooperative. But you know what? Obviously, he has an idea that the jig is up.
6 weeks later, in January 2009, Italian officials make arrangements to extradite Dr. Mark Weinberger. 5,000 miles away, Mark's ex-wife, Michelle Kramer, gets a call from a producer at America's Most Wanted.
I picked up the phone and I was crossing a busy street and she's like, Michelle, you need to sit down. And I was like, sit down? So I stopped at the side of the road and she said, they found Mark. Tears started streaming down my face and I just like collapsed in the snow. And I hung up and I called my mom and I said, Mom, they found him. And she was like, oh, I'm so proud of you, honey. It's a good thing. So, yeah. So they found him and then, you know, the circus began.
Everyone is blown out of the water. No one expected him to show up. He's smart, he's a mastermind. He knew how to render himself invisible. Now he's back and it's surreal. And some type of justice is gonna be served.
Weinberger is now behind bars, but the magnitude of his crimes will take years to sort out. In March of 2011, Phyllis Barnes' civil lawsuit against Weinberger finally goes to trial. Mark declines to attend, but the jury is shown a video deposition.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my Fifth Amendment privilege.
When we brought Weinberger in on that video deposition, it was a sweet justice. You could see a fall from grace. I would say that he was as close to a broken person as a guy like that can be.
He looked like a complete psychopath. You know, that's not the man that I met. That was a broken, sick, twisted, selfish, cowardly individual who had been beat. And I was just filled with such a sense of regret and shame that I was associated with this person.
Ken allowed me to be present for the deposition, and we were in a very small holding cell, and I was probably 4 feet from him. It was a very hard thing for me to deal with. I think he's evil. I don't believe he regrets anything other than being caught. I don't think he has a soul.
And it seems the jury agrees. They unanimously award $13 million in malpractice damages for the mistreatment of Phyllis Barnes.
When the jury came back with the verdict, I was relieved. I didn't even care how much the verdict was for, because I'm just sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is done. This is done. We won, and it was just this little joyous moment. I was never going to bring back my mother, but at least it was one chapter closed. This is finally finished.
In the end, juries would award more than $50 million in damages to Dr. Weinberger's victims, the vast majority of it paid by the Patients' Compensation Fund, the taxpayers of Indiana. Then, on the federal charges of 22 counts of insurance fraud, Weinberger is offered a plea bargain, 4 years in prison.
4 years? And even the judge, and this is very unusual, the judge says, 4 years? Forget it. You go back and you work something else out. And he ended up getting 7 years. And I didn't think it was enough.
What Mark did was wrong, but I think he's truly sorry for what he did. Probably it's just a dream, but it's my dream to be together again.
With credit for time served, Mark Weinberger will be released in January 2015, a prospect that angers his victims.
I wanted him to stay in prison the rest of his life, and I wouldn't have been happy with even that.
I have to still wonder if he has money stashed away somewhere where when he gets out and he's gone.
I had hoped that he would have gotten at least 10 years, like a hard 10 years.
Today, Michelle has a doctorate in psychology and is still struggling to get back on her feet financially and to understand the man who will forever haunt her thoughts.
Hi, Shelly. Merry Christmas. You like your new prize?
You know, I was watching the video. It makes me shudder a little bit.
I love you, baby.
When he says I love you in that sing-songy voice, it now comes off to me as very fake, is lacking any authenticity.
I love my fluffy robe and I love all my prizes and I'm the happiest guy in the world this Christmas.
You know, I was fooled. He fooled a lot of people.
Mark Weinberger violated the sacred, and it is sacred, the sacred trust that every doctor must have. By all accounts, what he did was unforgivable, despicable, and criminal.
You don't abuse power or take advantage of people that are weaker than you, and that's what he did. I'm not afraid of him, but I am afraid of what he could do to other people.